Hello, everyone. My name is Bennett Sung. I am with Fair Now. I'm very excited to introduce this great topic that we're exploring, and that is AI's potential in regional banks without the compliance headaches. We have some really strong experts in the space of private AIs, as well as AI governance. So I would love to introduce to you. We have representing Proxar. We have Shrikant, who's the lead developer and CEO, as well as Earl Mann, marketing strategist. And also representing Fair Now, we have CEO and founder Guru. So we're excited for everyone to sit back and learn. And just one quick technical check for those that are out there. If you have an opportunity to just tell us where you're dialing in from, we would love to hear what areas of the country and the world we're seeing you from. So if you can do that in the comments section, that'll be great. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to hand this over to Earl and Shrikant.
Hey, everybody. Thank you. Welcome. I guess I'll go first, Shrikant. Keep this quick. So thanks, everybody, for tuning in today. Today is really designed for you to be a cliff notes into some things that we think might be extremely valuable as we deal with this massive wave change that's being brought on by AI. My name is Earl Mann, and one of the things that might give unique perspective is that I actually helped introduce AI machine learning to some government industries back in 2000. So back in 2000, we had this earthquake of change that everybody predicted would change everything. But we in the industry knew that that change would come over a very long period of time, which we are now experiencing. And now I can say that people in the industry know that it's going to be the complete opposite this time. Change is going to come at a mind-boggling fast pace. So today is just to design to help get your mind around your planning, around your insights around things that you might do to aid your planning or your implementation or your execution of using AI. Shri, you want to give them a little bit of your background?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I am Shrikant. I'm more than a founder. I'm a lead developer of a private AI platform called Proxar. And myself, looking at my gray hair, mustache, you can figure it out. I'm a veteran. I'm a veteran of IT industry with over nearly 3 decades of experience spanning the complete SDLC process. Specifically related to the artificial intelligence, I have been in this field for the past decade. And it is more, I would say, calling may be a very big word here, but it's a kind of, how do you put it? Something that essentially dragged me into this to explore the possibility of how AI can be used to help an individual. Something like what we are talking of a chatbots today. It was like envisioning during the days of IBM Watson a decade ago. And that being said, and will anything technical related to these private AI models and how they differ vis-a-vis the chat GPTs of the world that you might have heard, feel free to shoot me all those tech questions. And the business side, my colleague Earl will take care of. And yeah, looking forward to a good, meaningful, and intellectual conversations in this session. Thank you. Yeah.
That's great. So you want to go to the first slide. So the intention of today, we're going to go fairly quick. If you want to change slides,
Sure.
We're going to go fairly quick. And as we go through this, the intent of this is for you to, we're going to start off very general and very brief, and we're going to slow down as we go through. But in the next 20 minutes or so, we're going to try to help you understand the difference between a private AI model approach, which few people really understand. We're going to compare that to some of the limitations of public LLMs, which everybody's now exposed to. At least we hope everybody on this call. And we're going to get into some of those things and use cases. And we're going to talk about the advantage of taking a multi-model approach as to just relying upon one particular model. And then we're going to talk about the framework of using an open source AI platform, a lot of which you've seen recently in the news from companies like DeepSeek. We're going to help you understand why that news about what they were able to do so quickly was so potentially disruptive to people's planning. So let's move into this. So here at a high level, we all understand we're assuming that everybody's used AI or uses AI every day now. Most people use some version of a public LLM, and we like to akin that to the analogy we're going to give to start to separate the idea of a private AI from a custom AI. From a public AI, is that of a tailored suit versus that of a closet full of suits. And on the surface, everybody understands the differences, right? One suit that's really customized to fit a person versus multiple suits that kind of come off the rack. But what we'd like you to think about a little bit deeper is what this is actually telling you. For example, when you have something that is customized, as you, the person, changes, you grow, you gain weight, you lose weight, right? You can rapidly adjust the suit to better fit the changes in who you are. And you understand how much more complex that would be if you had a closet full of suits and you personally made a change. Just the logistics of making the changes across all of those different suits in this case would be the tasks of doing those are completely different and completely a much higher level of complexity. Srikanth, if you want to just add a little bit to just some of the fundamental differences between a private AI model and a public AI model before we get into more detailed examples.
Sure. Yeah, sure, Earl. So when we're talking of, like, say, private AI model, before that, let's understand what exactly is not a private AI model. So we're talking of something like, generally speaking, we can call it as a public AI. So what do you mean by public AI? Like the public AI, for example, the Chat GPT behind, actually it uses a GPT-4, GPT-4o or whatever. So they are actually, we can call them as a public AI models. The reason why they are public is basically they are trained on vast or huge amounts of data that is available out there. Mostly it's like it's a Wikipedia or whatever the kind of like the data sets that they can lay hands on. So that's all the publicly supposed to be, actually, it's again, it's supposed to be in quotes, supposed to be publicly available data from which those models are trained. So we call them as a public AI models. And then what do you mean by private AI models in this context? Private AI models essentially are those models which are built or which are trained using the private data of organizations. So, for example, all of the organizations' data won't be exposed to public. So there is a good amount of organization data which is private. So those kind of, like, say, the private data that reside within the organization boundaries, we actually use that to build a private AI model. And why do we do that? It's like the example that Earl has quoted. It's like a custom fit versus one size fits all. All these public AI models are kind of like the one size fits all, unless you fine tune them based upon, again, a certain set of restrictions. In this case, it's always a custom fit where you bring the data and we train a private AI model, and that is for you and you only. You means
I think
your
the next slide is
organization.
I think the next slide, well, we can elaborate on that fundamental idea
Yeah.
now. Go ahead, next slide.
Yeah.
So before we do that, we're going to give you cliff notes as we go along. These are things you should be considering well down the road of considering, or have groups of people thinking about. What areas in your enterprise do you really intend to improve with AI? What are your specific desired outcomes for AI? And how will you measure the success of those targeted outcomes? Those are ways that are very practical when you start to plan on how and what you're going to do with AI. So next slide. So Srikanth talked about the example of general versus private knowledge. I'm the simple example guy. So a simple example of the difference that might make. In some cases, general intelligence and general knowledge may be good enough. For example, if you wanted to know generally where I was, I'm in Las Vegas at the moment. A map or a dot on the map might suffice. If all you needed to know was generally where I was existing in this moment, and I told you I was in Las Vegas, for whatever reason you needed to know that, a map might be good enough. But if you needed to know specifically where in Las Vegas, what are my cross streets, what businesses are near me, what's the distance between this business, that type of level of knowledge, you need much more detailed knowledge. And that can't really come from a general intelligence. What we're going to talk about is the trust factor. So everybody now knows that large language models hallucinate. In other words, they give you an answer that has nothing to do with the truth. But here's the challenge in that. It is so good at responding logically and using actual information that unless you already know the answer to be false, you won't know it's false when you read it. And I'm hoping people really get this, because a lot of people underestimate the liability of false information appearing to be true. And you can test it yourself. Just go to an LLM and ask a question about something you know very little about, like what's the relationship between, I don't know, quantum physics and an agriculture. It will give you an answer. But unless you already know those two subjects, you won't know whether the answer you're reading is true or not. Srikanth, you want to expand on just that hallucination problem? That's very common in public LLMs.
Right. So as a matter of fact, majority of these, like say the public AI models, you see them, they actually have a kind of like say fine print. The model, they'll actually mention, of course, they don't use the word hallucination. They suggest you to like say verify it by a human. That's what they have that. So I don't remember exactly the phrase these guys they use, so the ChatGPT and the Perplexity. Perplexity to an extent they're good, but essentially what it implies, hallucination implies, is that the response that has been provided by the public AI models, it is not necessarily be true. That's what it is. So as an example, as El was quoting, so if you ask a question about the quantum physics and in agriculture, definitely that a public AI model, if you can ask ChatGPT as you're listening now, you can actually, what is the difference between quantum physics and agriculture? It might be able to like say, provide a kind of like an answer, but that may not be actually true. It will be true only when it is validated. It's validated by an expert who understands both the subjects. So that's what it's hallucination, and we have a way of how to deal with this hallucination through our private AI models. Go ahead.
And a practical case example would be in industries where preciseness matters, like finance or legal. It's a fundamental difference between a public LLM answering a legal case law question versus a law firm having an AI answer it based on its internal data on that specific case law and that specific law firm's history with that specific case law. There are two different approaches. Now, as we go through this, we're not knocking LLMs at all. They're brilliantly serve a place in our lives. We're just making the case to help you understand the difference between the private AI and the public AI model. So next slide. And we know we're going a little quick, but this is just to help you get insight for your planning. So some questions you might want to take away are: what is the relevant data that would be best for you to train your AI on? And in what systems does this data reside? Where is it located in your enterprises? Because quite often you're going to find some very useful data in some systems, other useful data in other systems that at this moment, they may not be connected. But that doesn't stop us from using those systems those data wherever they may reside in the building of your model. And another important question is, what are the specific data restrictions around each individual type of data based upon where it resides and how it's being used? Next slide.
Yeah, I would just like to add one more point here, Earl. So when
Sure.
you're talking of the data restrictions, nowadays it's actually even the sovereign governments, they're actually having a kind of like a regulator mechanism where if certain businesses are limited by the amount of data that they can transfer outside the geographical boundaries of that particular sovereign country. For example, if you're something related to like I think finance, this is very true especially in the finance related or banking sector for that matter. So where the customers, whatever the customer information cannot go beyond the geographic boundaries. So that also we call it as a data restriction. Essentially, it is a kind of a data residency requirements, but we are clubbing them as a data restriction. Right, Earl?
That is great. And another point I'll make as we move to the next slide is there are ways that you can build these private AI models without actually needing to move your data outside of your enterprises that you already have rules around, governance around. So you don't have to necessarily move data outside of your enterprise to build a private AI model. And we can talk to you individually about how we do that. Next slide.
Right.
So this is a big one. So most people right now, we're going to talk about cost. And most people think about today, near-term costs, right? So they look at a LLM of the flavor of their choice, and they say, you know what, for $100 or $200 or $500 or whatever that pro level is, we can interact with this LLM, right? And that's very short-sighted. So there's development cost and access cost, your access to the model. And then there's cost around how do you get your access to that model to actually enhance business systems. But the cost we want to talk about today is a cost that few people really factor into our planning, which is cost of ownership, cost of operation, what it costs you to have this in a production system running. And that can be summed up in what's inference cost. Like, what does it cost you to use that large language model? And in most cases, what you're going to find is escalating costs that scales with both usage and number of users, right? So in the beginning, you're going to have very little cost to access a large language model. But very quickly, once you start using that model, your cost is going to grow exponentially because of the inference cost, how much it costs to hit that large language model to retrieve the information you want. The complete difference is that we can completely control or dramatically control that inference cost in a private model, just because of the nature of the difference in the way the two models work. In the examples that you see, you probably can't really see the charts well, but the inverted incline graph is both a public LLM, and the next one is a LLM that has been fine-tuned on some data. They both have escalating costs. The line that seems to be fairly flat, that's the relative comparison to using a private AI model. So there's a fundamental different long-term cost in using a private model versus using a public LLM. The difference is in the beginning cost, and the difference is in the long-term usage costs. Did I leave out anything, Srikanth?
No, you have covered, Earl. So I'll add a couple of things here to this, to what you just said. So as you see, it's like the blue one is, of course, I wish actually we could have zoomed it, but unfortunately we don't have that now. So basically, the blue color line is the public AI model. It's the vertical y-axis is the cost, and the x-axis is the number of what we call is the tokens. So as the number of tokens usage increases, the cost increases. And the way the cost increases, as you see in the graph, it is exponential for the public AI models, which is in blue color, and it's flat because the private AI model, of course, it has to process tokens, but we don't price it based on the tokens. We price it based on the hardware infrastructure that is used to host the private AI model. That's why you see it as a flat. That is one thing. And talking of tokens, why should actually increasing number of tokens increase the price? Oh, it's simple. It's if you, let's say, for example, if an organization has 100 users and each user, let's say, executes around 100 queries a day. So each query comprising of, you can say it's around 1,000 input tokens. So when you're talking of a 1,000 input tokens, of course, when you say it's a query, it's like it's a 10 words. Let's say 10 words or roughly around 14 tokens. But it's not just like, say, especially when you talk in the language of public AI, it's not just the tokens, the input tokens in the query, but also the prompt, essentially the context tokens that you send as part of your input, as part of your prompt. So that whole everything over a period of time, the moment it actually crosses, as you see both lines crossing around roughly around 40 million tokens, it just like say shoots up exponentially. As you can see, there's a steep curve in the graph.
Yeah.
So
So
the pricing difference, yeah, I'll just finish off
Mhm.
with this statement, Earl. So the price, it's a very crucial price difference that please note this very crucial pricing difference. The way the pricing is done for a private AI model, our private AI model, and the actual public AI models, and more or less the price is same. The graph that you're seeing is for GPT-4o. Uh, so so the pricing is the difference is for the public AI, the pricing is based on the number of tokens that have been consumed. The tokens includes your input tokens and also the output tokens. And in some cases, even the web calls also, for example, in Perplexity. But whereas in in our private AI model, it is the hardware. So the hardware that the line that I think roughly it comes around $180,000 in year. So it is for the top-notch Amazon one of the with 8 GPUs. So that's the kind of a pricing which we think is good for any average kind of average size private AI model. So that's the pricing is very crucial here. So that I want you to please note. And if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me at the end of our or during our Q&A session. Yeah, go
And
ahead.
the next slide, the next slide will give you things to think about as you do your planning. So now that you understand that there are two types of costs, one is just to get it up and access and stand up costs. Let's just call that development costs. But then there's ongoing operational costs, this inference cost. That's the one that most people overlook, but it rapidly becomes the most challenging thing in an enterprise because escalating costs is hard to build a business around. And the other thing you would want to start to think about the ROI on making the investment into this cost is what is the impact the AI might have on other existing initiatives that you have already budgeted. We already see people that are looking at their AI budget, and a lot of where that AI budget is coming from is reducing some of other budgets. So you need to get your mind around your total IT strategy so that you're putting the dollars in the place that serves you the best for the longest period of time. Next slide. And we're going to kind of, okay, so the last things are just more, these are useful concepts for you to really get your mind around. I know we have about 2 or 3 minutes left in our section. But your ability, once we build a private AI model, you are not restricted to using that private AI model for the first initiative that you built the model to do. That's just the starting point. Once you have a private AI model, it will really understand you, your data, the interrelationships between that exist in your data, how that data is connected, often in ways that may not be that apparent to you. We bring to visibility the non-obvious relationships that you can now use in your business processes. And we also, this allows you to also do very, very efficient prediction or better prediction. And a multi-model, we take a multi-model approach to do this. So, and I'm kind of talk about the next 2 slides in one for the efficiency of time. So we take a multi-model approach to do this. So right now, you see that the LLMs are broadening their ability to be multimodal, right? Which is text, video, voice, audio, graphs, charts, which is great. But to the same value that multimodal brings to extending what you can do with a model, a multi-model approach has the same upward pressure on your potential ROI, right? Because we used a large language model, we use statistical analysis, we use extractive AI, we use multiple models to allow you to leverage your private AI. And this multi-model approach gives you the best chance of future capabilities, regardless of the data type that information started from. So in a financial institution, you may have to have precise information that's literally specific to a bank account or an account number, or you may have general understandings of market trends and these different things. And your systems will be able to handle both of those at the customer level. Your customer will have a much broader ability to interact with your systems, both in a precise manner and in a more generalized manner, but all within the structure and box of your proprietary fact-based information. Srikanth?
Yeah, that's right, Earl. So this multi-model approach essentially is when you're talking of a private AI models. Private AI models, it could be a generative, it could be extractive, it could be a statistical model, or it could be a knowledge graph, or a combination of one and more of these. The reason why we actually take we have this is a very unique approach of us. So the reason why we take it is that number one, the topmost concern is reduce hallucinations that comes out of the generative AI. So knowledge graph, to an extent, it essentially reduces its hallucination coming out of the generative AI. And to be more precise, we actually, depending on the use case of that particular organization, we actually again, it's a tailor-made solution. So we actually try to understand, oh, maybe the statistical model works here, or maybe we need to build a knowledge graph for this organization. Oh, we need to have an extractive AI rather than generative AI. So those kind of decisions we actually take based upon the actual assessment that we do for organizations. Right, Earl?
That is perfect. So the answer to which models should we use is yes, probably a little bit of multiple of them. And
Right.
the final slide and the final idea we would like you to understand is actually, if we go to the next slide, because I can combine these two ideas, is this idea. Here's the road that most people are on, and they may not even realize that they're on this road. And they're on this road of they're going to start to incorporate AI. You're going to use more and more AI, but where you're eventually headed to is the point in time at which AI can help you develop your AI. If people are already doing that, right? A lot of the new tools that are coming on the market, you're seeing some of the greatest advancements that are having the biggest impact is where AI is aiding in the development of AI. You're going to have that same potential or scenario in your company, but at that point in time, you're going to want the AI you rely upon to help you navigate the usage of AI to be very smart on who you are, very specific to your industry, very smart on your particular data, customers, and industry. We're just calling it for now, we're just calling it kind of like an AI singularity, but it's that point in time where you have an AI in place that completely understands who you are as an enterprise, where your enterprise fits into the marketplace, and how your AI is working so that you can then internally start to use AI to advance your development of AI. So most people are on that road, whether they really realize it or not, but you can't get to that singularity moment, if you will, using a public model because it just won't know enough about you, your customers, or your particular industry. Srikanth?
Yeah, that's right, Earl. So I think you said it. It's like the AI singularity.
Okay, so we hope that you got a lot out of this. We really wanted you to walk away with some high level takeaways. Number one being the trust factor. If you're in an industry like finance, insurance, medicine, and more other industries, hallucination is a liability. Even in recruiting areas, right, where bias and things like that can come in, where the system can make things up, that's a liability. You need to maximize or control that or be aware of it. Cost, you now understand that there's right now costs and there's long-term costs. Long-term costs will dwarf right now costs, regardless of how big that ticket you're looking at doing your project is. Specialized insight is what allows you to differentiate to, one, better serve your customers, better serve your internal staff, and also innovate in your industry. You can take advantage of non-obvious relationships because you can see them. Precision is just not what LLMs are designed for. They're not necessarily designed for precision in terms of exactness or precise or truth, right? And that may matter in product visibility depending upon who you are. And hopefully we gave you some insight into that the ROI of a private AI model will extend beyond the initial project, because a private AI model will eventually increase the ROI of investments you've already made in other systems that AI will eventually help enhance the efficiency or the output. All ships rise with the tide, right? AI will be the new tide in which all of your business systems float upon. So the better you can get your mind around raising your AI tide, the more you are actually investing in raising the ROI of all other business systems. Anything else in conclusion, Srikanth, before we take any short questions?
I think we are good, Earl.
Okay. We really encourage one-on-one or direct questions so we can be very specific in your answers, but if you have any high-level questions, anything you'd like to ask, we can take like a minute or two to see if we can get those answers before we move to the next section on compliance and governance.
So I have a question in
Sure.
context, just to give perspective on what are the risks and safeguards in deploying private AI models against really sensitive customer data that's very prevalent in financial services?
Sure. Srikanth, did you want to?
Yeah, go ahead, Earl. That we discussed.
Yeah, I was going to say, so one of the fundamental there's a dramatic reduction in overall risk just because a private AI model is actually private. We can work within the already establishes rights permissions, security protocols, governance rules, all of those things. We sit inside of that pot, not outside of it. So just right off the bat, we start off in a much more controlled, safe environment. And then because of the nature of how we operate, we can build your interoperability with our model to be compliant with your specific rules around data governance and data management.
Right.
The other question we have is, what is one of the very first steps? The very first step customers should take is just an analysis of where you are and where you're trying to go. It's not complicated. What are you where would you like to go with AI? And if you answered some of those breadcrumb questions we left along the way, if you have answers to those questions, we can, in a very short engagement, give you very detailed insight on a path forward. And that path forward can be with us or independent of us, but it is a well thought out path forward that you should consider.
Right.
Excellent. Well, this has been super educational, Team Prakhar and Earl and Srikanth. So at this juncture, I'd love to kind of, segue into the governance and compliance side of applying AI in financial services. So I'll hand over the conversation to founder and CEO of FairNow, Guru.
Thank you. Can you all hear me well? Great.
Loud and clear.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Glad to be here. Glad to be here, folks. My name is Guru Sethupathi, founder and CEO of FairNow. And our mission is to really simplify AI compliance and risk management for our customers. And we're going to talk a bit about governance, risk management, compliance in the context of AI. One thing to just build off of what Earl and Srikanth were saying, another way to think about private AI is when you hire human talent, right? Let's draw an analogy here. When you hire human talent, sometimes you hire generalists, but oftentimes when you're hiring for a specific role, you hire for someone who has expertise in that industry, in that function, in that company, whatever that may be, right? And so that's another way to think about private AI versus kind of general AI, right? It's going to be embedded with some of that expertise, your own personal company data, your industry data, other types of knowledge and information that's going to make it perhaps better on certain dimensions, right? And so again, that's another way to think about private AI versus general AI. But look, we're going to talk about governance and compliance. And why are we talking about that? It's because it's the number one hindrance to the adoption of AI, right? The number one hindrance to the adoption of AI is companies are worried about the risks. And all sorts of risks, right? Risks around data privacy and data security that Srikanth and Earl just mentioned. Risks around bias of using these technologies. Risks around the laws and regulations that are now coming up, right? Numerous laws and regulations that are coming up and not knowing, are you compliant with these laws or not? What's going on? And so those hesitations, right? Is it reliable? Will it work? How does it work? All these, confusions and hesitations around risk are really the number one factor for slowing things down. I often say there are two risks to think about. The biggest risk you can take in this time is not to invest in AI. I'll say that again. The biggest risk you can take is to not invest in AI, because all of your competitors will be investing in AI, and this technology is going to transform businesses and markets. On the flip side, the second biggest risk you can take is not governing your AI. Because if you invest in AI and don't have solid risk management and governance practices around it, you are going to be liable and it is going to go off the rails. And so those two things go hand in hand. I often see companies too risk averse and too concerned and not investing and learning about how AI can transform their business. And then I see some companies jumping whole hog in without understanding the risks, without having a governance program in place, without understanding compliance, and setting themselves up for a real liability. And so there's a really fine line to thread here that we're going to talk about how good governance can really square that circle. And it can mitigate your risks while at the same time allowing you to harness the power of AI. And so especially for banks, right? Just a little bit of background. I've come from the financial services sector. I spent the last 7 years at Capital One. I was a senior executive there, leading AI technologies and teams, as well as managing governance. And so feel very comfortable in saying, look, most financial institutions already use AI in some way, shape, or form, right? Let's pause for a second. AI is not just Gen AI, right? It's not just ChatGPT and Claude and Llama. That's generative AI. But machine learning models that use data to learn and draw inferences and make predictions, they've been around for a while. AI has been around for a while, especially in financial services. And so many of you are already likely using AI via machine learning models. Either you built them internally or you use them via, you get them from vendor partners, from fintechs, et cetera. And now many more are interested in investing in Gen AI. So that's fact number one. Fact number two, which I'll share in a second, regulatory scrutiny is increasing, especially in regulated industries like financial services, insurance, health, HR, et cetera. These, and for reasonable reasons, right? AI is starting to make decisions around people's careers, around people's finances, around people's health. So it makes sense that there should be scrutiny around it. And for a lot of organizations, either AI risk management and governance is new or it's quite painful. It's very manual. I've lived this. I've had to do governance, AI governance in the past. I've had to do model risk management in the past. It's a lot of time. It's very manual. It's tedious, and it can end up being a lot of time. And so look, that's why we are here via our platform to really automate and simplify AI governance for our customers. Let's jump to kind of some of the things we're seeing in the industry, right? So among regulated industries, especially in banking and insurance, there's now a lot of increasing regulatory pressure. The interesting thing is there's already laws on the books. So if you think about it, in the lending space, there's already laws around anti-discrimination, right? That doesn't matter whether you're using human judgment, a machine learning model, or generative AI. Right? Those laws still stand. You cannot be biased in how you lend, so on and so forth. You have laws around data privacy. All those laws already exist. These new laws are just extending those laws even further. And so you have laws like the Colorado SB 205. That is a broad-based AI law. You have Colorado SB 21, which is focused in the insurance industry. You have laws in New York State and California that are starting to come out. Some have passed, some are about to pass, that, again, talk about the importance of AI, governance, and responsible AI. The EU AI Act has passed. So for those of you who are, at big banks, multinational institutions, that is going to be a big deal. EU AI Act is a very, very comprehensive act around the use and governance of AI, especially in high-risk domains, of which banking and lending and financial services and insurance are all considered part of high-risk domain use of AI. EU AI Act goes into effect January 2026. Colorado goes into effect January 2026. Numerous other laws go into effect later in 2026. So really, this is the year, if you haven't already, to start thinking about how are you managing these risks? What governance practices do you have in place? What policies do you have in place? What controls? What roles and responsibilities? All of these things are important. And you can see the increasing scrutiny. These are just an example of some recent lawsuits that have happened in the last couple of years, right? And this is just ramping up even further. And so again, I want to go back to that initial point. I don't suggest this to scare you from using AI, right? If you don't use AI, you're taking on a different kind of risk, but use it responsibly. And there's a way to do that well. When you think about governance, for those of you, hopefully this resonates. If you already have governance set up, we often hear how painful it is. Very few people come into a bank or financial services and want to work on governance. It's not a sexy topic. It's not the thing. It's not the cool thing. And so you often get a lot of turnover in risk management and governance teams. For a lot of regional banks that I've been talking to, a lot of them have a very small risk management team. It's not large at all, right? And now there's additional work to be done, additional risk management, additional laws, additional compliance. And so people are, especially mid-sized banks and some large banks are concerned about how they're going to manage all this with the resources that they have. And so how can you simplify? How can you automate? And as people who have lived this, me and my team, again, a lot of us come from Capital One, having lived this, we understand the pain points of governance and what you can do to simplify it, to automate it, etc. Because what we want to do ultimately is help you manage that risk better so you can go take on the fruits of your AI investments. So here are some common themes. Hopefully this is helpful for all of you, right? That we have seen, we've talked to dozens and dozens of folks at mid-sized to large financial institutions. And these are some 4 common themes. Oftentimes they feel that their governance maturity is fairly low, meaning they haven't invested a lot of significant resources in governance or risk management. They've kind of let it skirt. If especially their models are coming from external parties and vendors, then they're even less sophisticated often in governance. And so that's point number 1. Where are you on your governance journey? This is an absolute must-have going forward. Where are you on that journey? Are you in the low governance maturity rate where most other financial institutions, especially mid-sized financial institutions, are? Second, for those who do have a good governance program, who have solid controls in place, what we're hearing is it's mostly manual. It's very, very tedious, mostly manual. It requires people spending a lot of time and effort creating documentation, doing reviews, analyzing reports, et cetera, right? So ask yourself that question. Where are you on that governance journey? If you are more sophisticated on governance, are you automating many aspects of that? Are you able to simplify that, or is it manual, tedious, and cumbersome today? Also, a third piece I'm hearing is outside the biggest banks, a lot of banks get their AI from external parties. They get it from external vendors, they get it from fintechs, and now they're starting to get it from foundational models like OpenAI. They're getting it from other parties who are building on top of that foundational models. They're not often building it internally themselves. And so there's some mix of like internal models, but also a lot of external models. And how are you managing the governance of those external models? Just to be clear, that is your risk. If something goes wrong and you're using an external model, you cannot offload the blame to the external party. And there's already been legal precedent around this. I know it's not in the same sector, but Air Canada was using off-the-shelf AI tools as a chatbot to interact with their customers. Srikanth is laughing. I think he knows this example. And what happened was it hallucinated, it made up stuff, and some customers were misled about the refund policy. And look, this is a very simple example, right? And in the end of the day, the dollar amounts weren't huge, but the precedent was important. And when they sued, Air Canada tried to argue, oh, no, we got this from a vendor. We got this AI from a vendor. That didn't fly, and they lost the case. You are responsible for the AI's tools, models, systems that you use in your organization. And so that means you need to have governance around the vendor tools, the vendor applications. So how do you do that? And then the last thing is around, regional banks, mid-sized banks, large banks, they're all concerned about the increasing regulatory scrutiny and lawsuits. I think I showed you down the previous page. Not only are there more laws coming out, but the number of lawsuits have also increased. And these are, they're expensive. They're time-consuming, expensive. Settlements are huge. This is a concern. And this is something, again, most regional banks have not had to deal with in the past, but there's increasing scrutiny. And I showed that again on the previous page, but let me hit on that, right? Like, not all of these are large banks that you see on this page, right? And so you're seeing more scrutiny, especially with sponsor banks and their fintech partners, examining that relationship where there has not been a lot of governance, AI governance in the past. The OCC is coming down and putting in cease and desist around this. Right. So this is something for you to think about as you are already investing in AI and as you increase your investments in AI. Right. So what are some of the things around what good governance looks like? Right. What are the things you need to do? Well, one is, do you even have inventory of all of your AI assets and applications? What is an AI application even? How do you define it? Right. There are some applications that are simple predictive machine learning models. There are others that are much more complex. That take in a variety of kind of machine learning models plus LLMs, all to do a kind of chatbot. So what kind of model systems do you have? What kind of data goes into these systems? What kind of output comes out? How are you using these systems? What are the risks? You got to get your arms around all of this. So that's number one. That's kind of governance 101. Understanding what you have, what are your assets, how are they being used, and what are the risks? The next step around governance is humans in the loop. For a long time to come, as long as we invest in AI, we're going to need humans to play an important role in governance. Who's ultimately responsible for that AI solution? Who's reviewing the risks? Who's approving it at the end of the day? Who's creating the necessary transparency documentation? Multiple stakeholders will need to be involved, from the IT group to legal risk and compliance to the AI team, right? And so you need a way to get folks on the same page, to assign roles and responsibilities, and to be able to manage the governance and the risk. And that's especially true when you're talking about vendor governance. Right? One of the pains that a lot of customers facing is, how do I manage vendor governance? A vendor will just send over a bunch of documents. Are you going to sit there and read through dozens of documents from each vendor and say you have 20 vendors? What about OpenAI? What if all of a sudden OpenAI does something and they start using certain types of data that actually could get you in trouble? How would you know that? Are you monitoring all of their updates constantly? Imagine a place that is doing that automatically for you, right? That's automatically managing what vendors are up to and is able to tell you and flag you what risks you might have, right? Then it comes to documentation and reporting. Documentation and reporting is a huge, important piece around AI governance, both from a transparency standpoint, but from an audit trail standpoint, et cetera. Regulators love to see documentation, expect to see documentation. In fact, if you look at the EU AI Act, if you look at Colorado, we've already broken it down. There is a series of documents that they expect from you. Are you going to be spending all your time creating these documents? I remember on my team at Capital One, data science will spend 20% of their time, their overall time, just creating documentation for risk management for AI. That's a lot of time with expensive resources, right? How are you doing that? How nice would it be if those documents were automatically created, right? If there's automatic reporting and dashboards and documentation, how much time would that save you? And then the last piece is around regulatory compliance. What laws are in scope, right? One of the common standards in financial services is SR 11.7. And that's another question I'd encourage you guys to think about. How long or how many of you are following good standard practices around SR 11.7? Do you even know what that is? Do you know how to implement those controls in your organizations? Right? And then on top of that, there's many other laws, right? That I mentioned earlier that are coming out. What if there are going to be 20, 30, 40 laws, patchwork, a whole system patchwork of laws across states, across regions, across localities? How are you going to keep track of all that? In fact, someone asked me the other day, with this new administration, doesn't this all go away? And my answer is no, it's the exact opposite. Because what we're not going to get is any kind of federal law around this. We're not going to get any federal guidance, any federal law around AI. And so what's that going to do? Think about it for a second. What that's going to do is there's going to be now states are going to have to lean in on their own, and each state's going to do it just slightly differently. And so you're going to get a much more patchwork system of laws, and that's going to be a bigger pain to deal with. In 2019, there was one law related to AI. Today, globally now, there's more than 3 dozen. And I'm telling you, we're in the top of the first inning, right? We're in the top of the first inning. There's going to be many, many more. How are you going to manage all of these laws and understand what's in scope? What do you need to do? So on and so forth. Your legal risk and compliance teams will be overwhelmed. These are the components that we help with at FairNow. We help automate a lot of this. We help simplify this. And so instead of having to go build out a huge risk management and governance team to track all these things and manage all this work, imagine a platform that can do a lot of that for you. The one piece that we don't do that you should also keep in mind as part of good governance is testing and monitoring, right? Making sure your models are working properly. This is something Earl and Srikanth mentioned earlier, right? Making sure they're not hallucinating, make sure they're not biased, making sure they're not sharing data, important data, company data, private data, confidential data, right? There's a whole set of data and monitoring that's also important, and there are tools out there. And what's nice is we can integrate with those tools as well, right? And make sure all of that is satisfying compliance and regulatory expectations. I'm going to wrap up quickly here. I think what I'd like to do in this last couple of 2 minutes and then open it up to questions is just share the power of how we're leveraging AI ourselves, right? The platform has intelligence and automation built into it, and that's how we're building it. But what's cool is we're building into it knowledge of AI compliance and governance so that it becomes really, really good at this one thing. This platform isn't going to be able to solve all of your needs, but the things that it can do is it can absolutely solve your AI compliance and governance needs. It's going to be really, really, really good at that thing. It's going to provide you insights on that. It's going to guide you through the process. It's going to make the right recommendations, and it's going to automate a bunch of the activities. And so that's really where we're starting to see our customers benefiting, is they can leverage this platform to build that risk management in place, and then boom, they can go invest in AI and know that their risks are mitigated. That's a powerful combination. The companies that are investing in AI and managing their risks are going to win the next 5 years. So with that, I just like to conclude again. Our team, we're a bunch of, we understand this financial services industry well, come from Capital One, so we've been there. Capital One is probably one of the world's leaders when it comes to AI risk management and governance, right? They have amazing best practices around this stuff. And so I encourage you all to think about, how are you managing these risks? How are you simplifying this so that you don't have to build out a big team to go do this? And how are you ensuring that you're managing these risks so that you can at the same time take advantage of AI, which Earl and Srikanth said is going to be the biggest disruptor over the next few years. So on that, let me pause. And I think, Bennett, we have time for some questions.
So one question just popped up in the queue here, Guru. Why do we see low adherence to these AI laws among organizations? Is it a lack of awareness about the regulations, or how does it work, or the law amount of fines, or something else? So why is this low adherence to these laws? What's your opinion about that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Vipul has a question. I think Katrina has a question as well, just to make sure you don't lose previous questions as well, Bennett. So it's interesting, right? So I don't think that's quite accurate. There's, I think, low adherence to certain laws. So I think the law Vipul may be referencing is the New York City Local Law 144. And the challenge there is that law was quite poorly written. It was one of the first laws that came out, I want to say about 2 years ago. But the first draft of it came out actually, I think 4 years ago, back in 2021. And it went through multiple revisions before it was passed in 2023. And ultimately, I'll tell you, and we've written about this, it's not a well-written law, Bennett. It's not a well-written law. And there's many problems with that law. And so that partially has led to lower adherence. The second thing is that the fines are quite low. And so think about it, right? What's your incentive to comply with a poorly written law which has low fines? Well, there's not a huge incentive. That being said, we have seen more and more adherence with that law over time. So I think that's important. I think the thing to take away from the New York City local law is that while it wasn't a great law itself, it set the conversation. And since then, we've had many more laws, right? And again, like I said, a lot of these laws go into effect in 2026. So Vipul, if a year from now or a year and a half from now, you see companies not adhering or complying with the Colorado Act, with Illinois, with California, with EU AI Act, with the UK is about to come out with one. If 18 months from now, companies are not complying with any of those, come back and have that conversation with me, because I will be shocked. Their budget, they're much more comprehensive, and the fines are much bigger. Mm-hmm. In fact, the Euro AI Act fines can be upwards, especially for high risk systems, which many are in the financial services space, anywhere from 3 to 6% of your revenues. So you're not going to want to not comply with that.
Mm-hmm. Guru, this other question came from the audience that I just pulled into the queue here as well. Didn't pop in through LinkedIn, but the question came around: what frameworks or principles do you believe organizations should prioritize when operationalizing AI governance?
Yeah, that's great. Look, we have our framework, and I'll give you the highlights of that. But and that framework comes from our own experience and expertise, combined with what we're seeing out there in these new regulations. At the same time, there's some new standards that are coming out that I think are going to be a pretty big deal, right? Mm-hmm. You have the NIST. If you haven't heard, look it up. It's called NIST AI RMF. You can get more information off our website. Bennett will send you a link. Another standard is ISO 42001. ISO 42001 is actually a certificate standard. So if you follow those controls, you can actually get a certification from ISO and from an ISO auditor, and you can demonstrate that you have really good responsible AI practices. NIST is more of a recommendation. It's not a certificate standard. It's more of a recommendation. But again, we're starting to see many companies, especially in the US, using that as the default to start implementing a governance program. Okay. At a very high level, just to answer your question, what are good elements of a governance program? I think I mentioned them earlier. First, inventory your models, collect the metadata, and understand the risks. Second, you have to have an accountability framework. What roles and responsibilities do the humans in your organization play in terms of reviewing, approving, remediating, transparency, all these things? 3, you have to test and monitor these models, right? You got to test them constantly, test for bias, test for hallucinations, test for performance, test for data privacy. You got to run these tests and monitoring. And 4, you got to have compliance with laws and regulations, right? So that's a good kind of starting framework to think about. But then go check out, I think Bennett put something in here. Go check out these guidelines around, again, ISO 42001 is a great one. NIST AI RMF, they overlap 90%. And in fact, they also overlap quite a bit with SR 11.7. If you're not familiar, SR 11.7 has been around for quite some time and is a similar type AI model risk management guidance in the financial services space. In fact, many of these new standards and laws borrow from that. I often tell people financial services industry in some ways is ahead of the curve, right? And so SR 11.7, NIST, ISO, these are good standards to take a look at.
Excellent. And we had one question come in from, I think this is probably for Earl and Shrikant. So let's just kind of talk. I think you probably mentioned it towards the end of the presentation, but certainly you can, it'd be great to kind of circle back and, regarding the AI assessment, how long does it take and what are the costs? Earl, Shrikant?
Sure. So the assessment itself, I mean, the first step of the assessment is a phone call that takes less than an hour. And we can normally give you useful feedback inside of a week or so, depending upon what we get from that first call. So it's not a big time investment, but it is definitely an investment that people should take. To Guru's point, the regulations and rules around all the things we're dealing with are going to escalate. And this is not the adoption of AI, although it seems optional now, it's not really optional. That's an illusion. Nobody on this broadcast now can go to a Best Buy and buy a black and white TV. That's because the industry forced change. That's exactly what's happening right now with AI. So everybody's on some road towards AI, being with AI, being behind and competing against companies with AI, or just left behind altogether. So we, both of us, both Proxar and FairNow, really believe that you should really spend the time now in your planning and to do that smartly. It's more like sharpening the axe before you cut down the tree type of a metaphor. As you can tell, I'm a metaphor guy. But that's the big takeaway we hope you get from today's broadcast.
Great. Well,
And there's
I
no
appreciate-
cost. There's no cost to the assessment. Sorry.
Here we go. No cost. No cost. Again, thank you all so much. This conversation is not ending today. This presentation will be available on demand through LinkedIn. So please, we will be monitoring questions that come in from additional commentary as folks listen in later on in their day and their journey and such. So again, appreciate Praxar, Earl, Srikat, thank you so much for your insights and your contributions, as well as to Guru at Fair Now. Let's not forget to connect with them on LinkedIn. It's very easy. Obviously, you can type their names in or take a photo of the QR code and it'll be taking you right there. But anyways, appreciate everybody's time that you spent with us today. And we will be back soon with additional webinar content around all these topics, AI, private AIs and AI governance. Again, thank you all so much and have a great rest of your Thursday.
Yeah. Thanks, Bennett. Thanks, everyone.